Hello, I'm back with another video, and then I just want to start this one saying that this might be an example of how some of the best planning that we may ever do is the planning that we will never do, and that is just being authentic, congruent, hardworking, and yet spontaneously running with the different things that come about around us and for us as the best mode of planning. And I think with that, that kind of goes into that discussion that I'm coming back with into badassery and um, and then also with that on this channel I've had some different series that have taken place now, and a lot of times I wasn't aware that that's what they were becoming, but I was just coming forward with inspiration, and then maybe like following up. I guess maybe the best creativity builds upon itself, and then whether or not, because I'm reading a book now called Steal Like an Artist, and it says that most creativity is upon something else that came before it, and that can equally be said with this series of where I'm discussing badasses, where clearly the badasses had come first. What came first, the badass or the video? um, what came first, the badass or the dork describing badasses? um, so but with that, I wanted to follow up that video with a couple more salient examples of badassery that I'm aware of that could neatly fit into some of the principles I was talking about there. So in that video, I had led up with about 3 to a 4th badass. The first of which being a man scaling rock faces with his bare hands. The third being a man swimming, actually a pair of men swimming with great white sharks on their own breath, and then having the type of voice afterwards that would go along with that type of experience that I don't want anywhere near around me and people that I'm attracted to. And then the third being a pair of men who were, and not to make light of the last pair, a pair of men that were stuck in no less than a trench within the last year or so abroad, and were confronted with what was cited in the commentary to be at least 12 combatants of a different allegiance that were not aware of their actual situation, yet they were able to prevail in that exchange and actually survive it. The two men being one a very young man, and then a man much his senior who was described, who was referenced within the subtitles as having arrived to his first day in a combat situation as an older man, and that the younger man was intrepid and innovative enough to range the weapons he was using to give the appearance of being formidable, and then maybe actually the effect of being more formidable with the loading and the assistance of this older man who was yet he was experiencing shell shock in that moment, but he had enough awareness and fortitude to follow the directive of a younger person based on the strength and efficacy that younger person was demonstrating, and they survived that together. It can be argued that neither of them would have survived that if it wasn't for the strong efforts that they both made according to their own strength. But I want to say, of those 3 badasses there, maybe the strongest badass would be that older man who simply followed directive under unimaginable challenge and danger. But then to go with that one further, and I also pointed out that within the first 2 of those, it's unique that they were cultivating the confidence and the challenge of a situation that can afford to lend itself to becoming a badass, but they had not placed other people in danger. I said that maybe they potentially put their families' mental health, or they exposed their family to their what may or may not be their family and loved ones to a level of danger by exposing themselves to danger, and they yet also expose themselves to danger. But by and large, that's more sober and equitable and maybe upright than different things we can do to become badasses that place other people in unnecessary danger, whether that be activities or the fallout that can come from activities and how that affects people we love. But then this other man that I want to reference now I don't know that there's any value in dropping anyone's name other than for purposes of erudition, which erudition is a stronger word than education, because education as it exists in modern Western terms can be a function of animal husbandry and indoctrination, where human beings are effectively rounded and led along similar to livestock would be. And I think it actually contains livestock principles. The eminent Taj Tariq Bey, the scholar and eminent figure, he has cited the overlap between animal husbandry and what we know of as education. And then he says a stronger term is erudition, which had existed and existed prior to what became the prevailing educational system, at least in the United States, to where in times past people were actually being cultivated into being philosophers, scientists, artists, real erudition. And then in modern terms, is stepped away from that, and it's more about indoctrination at this point. But even within all that, following directive is yet a vital skill. So I don't want to take that away from education or erudition. But so but I a little bit lost my train of thought. But all I meant to say is that this fourth example. Oh, I normally don't name drop, and I fancy myself a would be musician, and musicians are wont. That means have a bad habit or have a strong habit and inclination to reference names. When you get a group of musicians together, like, oh yeah, I worked with Bobby Joe down on Beale Street in 1962, and there was a guy there named Gene Warren, and Gene Warren was about the meanest guitarist you would. That's what it's like around musicians, but for the purpose of erudition or facilitating like a contact or a reference, then I think name dropping is okay. So there's an athletic figure on YouTube named Hannibal for King. He's been around at least for like 10 years, and he does some of the most incredible stuff you might ever see with his body in what's called calisthenics, as one of the most efficient and strong ways of building strength based on the proportions and the challenge of our own body weight, as being superior in many respects to weightlifting based on the unnatural pressure that weightlifting puts on joints and ligaments, and maybe tendons too. And then also some of the imbalances and skewed development of the muscles that are not proportionate to reality. I would say that in layman's terms, but that if you were to witness some real calisthenics taking place, is some of the biggest badassery you'll ever see. And and also in that other video I said that badassery can almost be godly at times, and that Hannibal for King, if you see what he's done on document on YouTube, it's really like that. And like a lot of people talk about like 6'4" this and 6'4" that, and I'm about 6'4" myself. But I've recognized that sometimes people of a smaller stature can be equally as, if not far more, formidable in any type of engagement, like physical engagement, to where I'm not trying to square off with anyone I don't have to. Smaller than me, the same size as me, bigger than me. But if I had to, as a 6'4" person, I wouldn't look past anyone smaller in stature than me, whether they're knocking something down that looks like them or knocking down something beautiful. I wouldn't put anything past a smaller person. And this person, Hannibal for King, he's a little bit of a smaller stature, where sometimes the smaller people, like whether in terms of what he's doing with calisthenics or like acrobatics, the smaller people are more formidable pound for pound, and even maybe more efficient at different things. Like if I was squaring off with him, I don't know that I'd be superior in anything but maybe reaching for something like unhealthy on a high shelf. But in all intents and purposes, his physique might play into some of the awesome things he can do. And I wanted to point that out. But that's no excuse for any of us. There's no excuse for any of us, whatever our size is. We have to get it how we live, and he's getting it how he lives there. But what he does is that he follows some of the features I pointed out in that other video. Is that he's working with the eccentric features of an environment, and what he's doing with it, he's improvising exercises on a playground, as sophisticated, if not more, than anything you would find in a kinesiology or physiology text of any medical program or weight training program or physical therapy program. What he has discovered of his own insight, instinct, initiative, creativity based on playground equipment largely in the New York City area, I think, is profound and mind-blowing. But yet he's engaging with the eccentric features of the environment, with the eccentric features of his physique, the eccentric features of his approach, and the endowment of his physique, the endowment of his mental gifts and approach, which is part of that other video, and then also his image, because in that video he said that he just made no bones. He said, I'm looking for a certain type of image right here. You know, I need to get my chest looking like this, and I want the six pack to look like that, because it's when you take off your shirt and you're working out the playground, you get a certain kind of feedback. And that's what I'm going for. That's what we're going for with this. And you're not going to get it unless you get down, you get low, and you do things the right way, the proper way. That's how he talks smooth like that. But he's embracing his self-image at that point. And I was referencing in that other video about badassery is that if I were to if I were to pull out my backside as much time as it takes a dork to make a video about badassery, I would say that three salient features of badassery are engaging with the eccentric features and opportunities of a unique environment or circumstance, not the least of which are self and the other components of badassery, our unique endowments as we come into and experience a circumstance or environment, and then our image and how our image of ourself plays into our own confidence and coordination of our abilities and ability to engage in environment, but also how we can get in and out of and deal with different elements of an environment based on our appearance and maybe a conscious approach or at least a conscious appreciation of the strong suits and the weak points of our appearance is all coming into badassery. But then I want to go yet a step further than that and say another badass that I came across is sometimes I've seen different documentaries about war-torn areas in other places where some journalists might be some of your real badasses. I'm getting badder and badder with all these examples, but the lengths that certain journalists go to bring us a real story and an insight into conflicts that can really actually change public opinion, and because public opinion is very powerful in all types of conflicts, and that's understood by both conventional and unconventional approaches to different conflicts. Is that opinion and awareness about that it counts for something, because that's where your support's coming from, that's where your resources are coming from, and that's also where your resistance is coming from. And so one could say that some of the greater objective of any conflict is actually the changing of public opinion. And the YouTuber King Noble has pointed out that there is no revolution, there's no successful revolution outside of a change in consciousness. You can win all the battles, you can do all the daring feats of heroism, but until we've changed our consciousness, nothing has changed. And I think journalists would be some of your salient your real agents of change in a conflict theater is the lengths, but also the proximity that a journalist will go to bring out the truth as being badassery in the highest degree. But then with that, I've seen different drivers, like in other countries, like sometimes a driver of a rebel faction will yet meet a journalist of a different nationality, and then also of a gender that could their identity could cause them problems in that setting, notwithstanding that they're actually trying to furnish the story of a side. So I've seen different drivers in different countries smuggle a journalist past their own side to get them deeper to the people who have something to say about their struggle. Allow the people the driver is serving both the journalist and their side, to bring the journalist closer to their side, to give the journalist an understanding and a story of their side, while the people of that side know that normally under normal circumstances that journalist would not be allowed there even by them, but yet they are conceding their own story in a greater objective to impact the conflict. And so in a great degree, all of that is righteous. But yet it's difficult. So I've seen these different drivers go way off the beaten path, and they know different terrain that's unmarked like the back of their hand, and they might even have to smuggle a person past their own checkpoints. And so it's been said that we are not to create if you describe something in a certain way, you can't help but to mock something when you describe it, because your description of something is likely to contain oversights or misrepresentation, whether you comically do so on purpose to bolster that, or whether through your own ignorance in approaching something, you actually misconstrue and misalign what it is. So it can be mocking something to describe it. So from that standpoint, we're not to mock or create images of what is absolute. But I think we are afforded the ability to praise something that's absolute and worship it. And part of that is in drawing metaphor, because metaphor is very potent and fundamental within different forms of artistry. One might argue that all artistry is metaphor. I just pulled that one out of my backside as much time to make this video also. But with that, so we can't describe or make an image of what is absolute and still be upright and proper. I think it's been said by different traditions, but we can draw metaphors. And if I were to draw a metaphor of what I think is absolute, it would be similar to these different drivers smuggling the most outstanding agents, being journalists, towards the deeper rungs of conflict and in turbulence, to get an inside story to then smuggle it back out and inform and change public awareness and therefore consciousness, and really attain a victory in the true sense of that word victory, that is equitable for all if it's based in truth. So from that standpoint, in that greater dynamic of all these badasses, similar to all of them, but as the metaphor of the real badassery that can be equated to what is great in this life, would be that driver that's improvising upon eccentric features of a terrain based on their own endowment, skill, and creativity to do something truly outstanding, as being similar to the absolute, being like that kind of driver, that nondescript driver. And I want to say that in such a setting, you could imagine that kind of driver wouldn't be really keen to give up their real name if they were asked what their name is. So it can be said that that type of figure would be better described than to they would be better described from without than to describe themselves. And so that sometimes the most like, for me, I have a rare name that's from halfway around the world, and I grew up not hearing it pronounced. But the only time that I ever heard my name actually pronounced was from someone that's from the region I'm from, where I am, who's a cool person. And that experience of hearing my name pronounced changed my life. And I once had a lady friend who had experienced my name be pronounced by that person when I was not present, and she was equally moved to hear it pronounced. She told me. But all I meant to say is that we actually can't, the best of what we are actually not aware of it, or probably can't even pronounce what we are if we're being authentic. But we can sometimes have insight into what we are from an outside source. So what I meant to say with this video is that I think what is absolute may not be inclined to describe itself, but it can yet be described based on people and things that have experienced the outcome of its work. And so what I want to say is that for all of us watching this video, we may not be the same as these people, and we may not have to undergo what they've went through. But there's a blessing in that. But we also have gone through things that can be equally, if not is equal of difficulty for our ability in our experience as them. But what I want to say is that we might not be badass rock climbers, badass people who can swim with a great white shark and live to tell about it without equipment. And then we might not be like a single combat unit within one man, and then an equal a badass that can follow directive on their first day in the front line when they're at a physical disadvantage based on age. We might not be a journalist willing to risk life and limb of whatever gender to dare to get the truth. And then we might not be an outstanding driver without a map in a rugged terrain, in an actual war zone. And then we might obviously we're only yet a small part of what is absolute, but we are unique in ourselves. So I want to say that maybe what you really are, maybe who you really are, is something that has been described about you, about someone from any walk of life, any range of life, any background may have once described you as something. I've been described as communicative. I think when I was described that, it wasn't necessarily a compliment, but it wasn't necessarily an insult, but it was yet something that can describe who I am from without. Because the really greatest things about us and also the worst things about us are exactly what we can't see about ourselves, because there's much we can't see about ourselves. As I'm looking at you, I can see myself in the camera, but I've never actually looked at myself directly, at least in the face, and that's because that's impossible. So I meant to say that a lot of what we really are, the best and worst of us, we actually are not aware of it. But sometimes, every once in a while, we'll get half a clue from someone that has experienced us, whether that be a very small person. The worst of Arthur Avalon once say that a wise saying should be accepted even from a child if it's well reasoned and measured. And that's a good attitude to have around all people, because all people can tell us something. And so and so with that, I've been described as different things, and sometimes the most inspiring, but also sometimes accurate ways I've been described have been by unseeming people, like a kind of overbearing boss calling me communicative, or a very young child calling me either cool, talented, or a giraffe. Because I've been called a giraffe different times by children when I was yet a child, and then when I was leading children at different times, I've been called a giraffe. So I'm a communicative giraffe. Accordingly, that's the most eloquent way to describe me, I've been told. So I would challenge you to look into your background and see what have you maybe been described as, not as without being flattered by someone, but also without being outright affronted. What have you actually authentically been called in some moment that gives you half a clue about yourself, and that might be who you really are. And then I think it says that all of us have a name. We have a name in heaven that hasn't been pronounced to us yet. And I would say that probably has to do with like what we actually are and do for ourselves and other people in this life, that we may not be able to enunciate without the full grasp of in understanding the impact of who and what we have been. But yet one day we may actually hear our name pronounced. So I'll leave this in that video in that sense. But for all of these people, notwithstanding the absolute, I'll call them badasses, and then the absolute I'll call the absolute. Peace.